Hey guys, we're talking about money destruction in a limited reserve framework, and in this video, guys, we are talking about an open market sale. That's right. This is when the Fed sells government bonds or T-bills to the banking system, basically an asset to the banking system to pull reserves out of that banking system to destroy money. Now again, this is a limited reserve framework, guys, so we're harking back to 2008 and all that time prior to 2008. Again, we're shooting videos on a limited reserve framework because the AP still tests it, and also some colleges still want their students to understand a limited reserve framework. I think they believe that if you understand the limited reserve framework, you'll understand the ample reserve framework all the better. So let's get to it, guys. We're going to have an open market sale. We're destroying money. Now, a couple things, though, to set up before we get too deep into it, guys, is for this scenario, guys, and that's what this is, a scenario, or at least that's how the language I use for it. It's a scenario, an open market sale. We're going to assume no banks have excess reserves. No banks in the entire system have excess reserves. And we're assuming that the required reserve ratio is 10%, okay? So let's get to it. Like I said, guys, the Fed is going to make an open market sale. They're going to sell something. What are they selling? Again, T-bills, U.S. Treasury bonds, however you want to say it. I just say U.S. bonds, okay? So U.S. bonds. Since the Fed is selling those, okay, these are going to be an asset to Bank One, and we're going to say it's going to increase their assets. And oh, by the way, we're going to say it's just $1,000. Now, that's kind of crazy because usually this happens like $100 billion or maybe 50 billion, whatever. It happens in billions, but I'm just going to say $1,000 just because we're going for conceptual understanding. So they're going to sell a U.S. bond to the bank for $1,000, okay? So asset, U.S. bonds plus $1,000. Now, it is kind of important to note, guys, that a U.S. bond is an asset to anybody and everybody in the entire world except for the U.S. government, which is not going to make an appearance in this video, okay? So the U.S. government, yes, that bond is a liability to them, but anybody else that owns that bond, it is an asset to them. It was an asset to the Fed. It is now an asset to Bank One. Now, they sold that bond to do what they wanted to do, which was pull reserves out of the banking system. So asset reserves minus $1,000, okay? This is our T1, okay, right? They're selling a bond to pull reserves out. And as far as we're concerned, they are destroying those reserves. If you like to think of keystrokes, we're hitting delete on the reserves, they're gone forever. If you like to think a little bit more tangible, okay, they're pulling these Federal Reserve notes, these reserves out of the banking system, and they're shredding them, okay? So that is it for these reserves. Now, important to note, guys, what the Fed is doing is changing the monetary base. That's right, when the Fed acts, when they take an active role, guys, they're changing the monetary base. Open market purchases change the monetary base. Open market sales change the monetary base. In this particular case, guys, since they're pulling reserves out and destroying them, right, deleting them, shredding them, whatever you want to think of, guys, the monetary base is going down. This is not a withdrawal where reserves are heading into currency in circulation. That's a withdrawal, no monetary base change. This is a change in the monetary base. Pulling the reserves out, and we're getting rid of those bank reserves, and they're not becoming currency in circulation. Now again, this is T1, transaction one of this scenario. Again, the scenario being an open market sale. Once you do T1, guys, you are ready to answer the first two questions of the big 8 questions we need to be able to answer regarding any scenario out there. The first two questions, immediate change in the monetary base and immediate change in the money supply. Was there an immediate change in the monetary base? Heck yeah, that's what we've just been talking about, right? We lowered the monetary base by $1,000. So it went down by $1,000. Was there an immediate change in the money supply? Typically, the Fed does not directly change the money supply, and they did not in this particular case, okay? All they did was pull reserves out of the banking system. No change yet in demand deposits or currency in circulation, okay? Now, just to let you know, spoiler alert, currency in circulation is not going to even come up in this video, and neither are savings accounts going to come up in this video, which are both part of M1. We're focused on demand deposits, but anyhow, we didn't see any change in any of those three things, currency in circulation, demand deposits, or the savings account. So guys, hey, we pulled reserves out, but we haven't destroyed any money, so no change, but no or zero, however you want to put it right there for that question. But now we've got to get to T2, okay? Now, the first thing to understand about T2 is Bank One is now deficient in reserves, okay? Assume no banks have excess reserves, which means Bank One did not have excess reserves, and they just lost 1,000 in reserves. So how much are they deficient by? The answer is 1,000. Now, if you watched my video on a withdrawal, you might have been tempted to say 900, but be careful, guys. In this particular case, there was no change in demand deposits, okay? So since there was no change in demand deposits, they're still required to have as many reserves as they were required to have prior to this open market sale. Okay, so therefore, guess what? If they are still required to have the same amount as they used to and they lost 1,000, and again, they had no excess reserves originally, they are now deficient by the entire 1,000, okay? So since they're deficient by 1,000 in reserves, and just by the way, go watch that withdrawal if you're confused at all right now, okay? This is kind of a part 2 in that money destruction series. The withdrawal was the first type of money destruction. This is the open market sale portion, okay? So again, they're deficient by $1,000. What are they going to do? Well, the first thing you would do is go to the federal funds market and try to borrow reserves from other banks, but no banks have excess reserves, so that's not going to work for you. So then you head over to the discount window and you try to borrow reserves from the Fed. But the Fed is doing an open market sale to take reserves out of the banking system. They're not going to turn around and then loan reserves to the banking system and stop the money destruction that they want to see. They're trying to tighten money in the economy, okay? So the Fed is going to shut the window and say, no, we're not doing loans today. Our discount window is closed. The next thing you do is sell an asset, like a bond that you might own. A bank owns bonds, right? Or they just got another possession of a bond, right? Or a mortgage or some other type of loan, some other asset of the bank. They might try to sell to other banks. But again, no banks have excess reserves. They're not buying any of their assets. So we're on to option 4 when you become deficient in reserves. What's the 4th thing you do if you're deficient in reserves? You have to call in loans. That's right, some loans are callable, so they're going to call in loans. They're literally going to call up somebody and say, hey, you got to repay part of your loan. We basically need reserves. So just like the withdrawal, we're going to call Ed again, okay? So Ed is our go-to person, guys. We're going to call up Ed. Ed happens to have a loan at Bank One, and Ed banks at Bank Two. Now, what does that mean that he banks at Bank Two? His checking account is at Bank Two. This is not weird. This is actually very common where somebody has a checking account at one bank and a loan from another bank. That happens all the time, okay? So again, his checking account's over here. We say basically that Ed banks here, but he has a loan with Bank One. Bank One calls up Ed and says, hey, you have to repay us some of your loan. How much does Ed have to repay? Well, they're going to call in $1,000 because that's how much they're deficient. So, continuing on with my T-chart here, asset, loan. Now this is Ed's loan, and why do we like Ed? Because there's 2 letters in the name, right? So loan, it doesn't really look like loan, but anyhow, loan Ed minus 1,000, right? He's repaying his loan, so that loan is going down, that asset of the bank is going down. But the reason the bank did this was asset reserves plus 1,000. Now that was T2, but we are not done with T2 because we need to clear Ed's check. That's right, we have to clear Ed's check. And this little wiggle of the finger is basically we have to send it to the Fed. Fed's going to clear it there, and then the Fed's going to send it over to Bank 2 and say, Bank 2, get your books right because, hey, Bank 2, a depositor, Ed, wrote a check to Bank 1. So when Bank 2 gets this check to finish out the clearing process, Bank 2 will know to do assets reserves. Oh, we lost 1,000 in reserves to Bank One. Liability, demand deposit, Ed, minus 1,000. Okay, that is also T2. Okay, now that we have done T2, and by the way, there's going to be a T3 and a T4 and a T5, and all our T's after T1, which is the name of the scenario, that's what happens in T1, is the scenario's name happens, right? This was an open market sale, that's what happened in T1. T2, T3, T4, T5, those are always going to be loans or repayment of loans. Since we're doing money destruction in this video, T2, T3, T4, T5 is all going to be destruction of loans, okay? It's going to be calling in those loans. And again, just to maybe, close the loop on this, guys, Bank 2 is now deficient in reserves. And how much are they deficient? Not by 1,000. They're deficient by 900 because they lost 1,000 in demand deposits. And since they lost 1,000 in demand deposits, they are required to have 100 less in reserves. And if you didn't follow that, guys, the required reserve ratio is the percent of demand deposits you must hold in reserves. So if your demand deposits go down by 1,000, they're required to have 100 less because 10% times 1,000 is 100. They're required 100 less. They lost 1,000. They're not deficient by 1,000. They are deficient by 900, okay? And so they're going to call in a loan for 900. Bank 3 is going to be deficient by 810. The next bank deficient by 729, and the dominoes are going to drop, and money is going to get destroyed. Okay, but we don't need to do all that. We don't need to do T3, T4, T5, all that calling in of loans and see all that money destroyed. We can right here get all our answers that we need by just making it through T2. We're ready for those last 6 questions. Remember, 8 questions for any scenario. We've done 2 of them. Here's the last 8, okay? The first one is maximum initial change in demand deposits. Now, if it didn't happen in T1, and there was no change in demand deposits in T1, we continue on to T2, because initial means first. Immediate means it had to happen in T1. Initial just means first. First could happen in T2, and it did. T2 demand deposits 1,000. So we're going to put a negative 1,000. The money multiplier is the inverse of the required reserve ratio. The required reserve ratio is 10%. So 1 over 0.1 is 10. So again, negative 1,000 times 10, negative 10,000. Maximum initial change in bank lending. So what's the maximum initial change in bank lending we could get would be if they had to recall that whole amount that they became deficient in reserves, okay, by calling in those loans. I shouldn't say recall, by calling in those loans. So we got the maximum in this particular scenario. So we just go look for that initial change in bank lending. Didn't happen in T1, no problem. Move on to T2. Oh, there's our loan. That's our first change in loans, minus 1,000. That's what we're putting, minus 1,000 times 10, maximum change in bank lending, minus 10,000. The final question, maximum initial change in the money supply. Well, the money supply changed when bank lending changed, when that loan got repaid, right? When that loan got repaid, we see money being destroyed, okay? So again, remember, Ed was called up. He had to repay that loan, $1,000, which decreased his demand deposit by $1,000, and we saw that demand deposit go down by $1,000. That's him losing the ability to buy goods and services by $1,000. That is a destruction of the money supply, destruction of money. So the decrease in the money supply that we're going to get is associated with that loan being called in. Remember, loans create money. The repayment of loans destroy money. So again, negative 1,000. The maximum initial change in money supply, negative 1,000. Money multiplier, 10. 1 over the required reserve ratio, maximum change in the money supply, negative 10,000. And those negatives matter, guys. Make sure you include those negatives. 8 questions we need to master for each of our scenarios. What are each of our scenarios? The first 2 have to do with money creation, and that's a deposit. Okay, so somebody makes a deposit, or an open market purchase. That's scenario 1 and 2. I like to say, then there is scenario 1, the B side, and scenario 2, the B side, which has to do with money destruction. Scenario 1, the B side. What's the B side of a deposit? It's a withdrawal, and that creates money destruction, or it causes money destruction. Scenario 2, the B side. What's the B side of an open market purchase? An open market sale, and that's what we did in this video. We did an open market sale. Again, pulling reserves out of the banking system. And when we did that, it led to money destruction. Mainly, we got that big money destruction, the maximum money destruction, because no banks had excess reserves at the beginning of this whole process. Hope that made sense to you. We'll see you in the next video.